All right, guys, I'm back with another chapter in First Kings. We're in First Kings chapter 11, where the header reads Solomon's many wives, and we'll get right into it. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, "You must not marry them, because they will turn your hearts to their gods." Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord his God, as his father David had been. Solomon worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. In this way, Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to follow the Lord completely, as his father David had done. On the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, he even built a pagan shrine for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and another for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Solomon built such shrines for all his foreign wives to use for burning incense and sacrificing to their gods. The Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. So now the Lord said to him, "Since you have not kept my covenant, and have disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you, and give it to one of your servants. But for the sake of your father David, I will not do this while you are still alive. I will take the kingdom away from your son, and even so, I will not take away the entire kingdom. I will let him be king of one tribe, for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, my chosen city." Then the Lord raised up Hadad the Edomite, a member of Edom's royal family, to be Solomon's adversary. Years before, David had defeated Edom. Joab, his army commander, had stayed to bury some of the Israelite soldiers who had died in battle. While there, they killed every male in Edom. Joab and the army of Israel had stayed there for 6 months, killing them. But Hadad and a few of his father's royal officials escaped and headed for Egypt. Hadad was just a boy at the time. They set out for Midian and went to Paran, where others joined them. Then they traveled to Egypt and went to Pharaoh, who gave them a home, food, and some land. Pharaoh grew very fond of Hadad, and he gave him his wife's sister in marriage, the sister of Queen Tahpenes. She bore him a son named Genubath. Tahpenes raised him in Pharaoh's palace among Pharaoh's own sons. When the news reached Hadad in Egypt that David and his commander Joab were both dead, he said to Pharaoh, "Let me return to my own country." "Why?" Pharaoh asked him. "What do you lack here that makes you want to go home?" "Nothing," he replied, "but even so, please let me return." Please let me return home. God also raised up Rezon, son of Eliada, as Solomon's adversary. Rezon had fled from his master, King Hadadezer of Zobah, and had become the leader of a gang of rebels. After David conquered Hadadezer, Rezon and his men fled to Damascus, where he became king. Rezon was Israel's bitter adversary for the rest of Solomon's reign, and he made trouble just as Hadad did. Rezon hated Israel intensely and continued to reign in Aram. Another rebel leader was Jeroboam, son of Nebat, one of Solomon's own officials. He came from the town of Zeredah in Ephraim, and his mother was Zeruiah, a widow. This is the story behind his rebellion. Solomon was rebuilding the supporting terraces and repairing the walls of the city of his father David. Jeroboam was a very capable young man, and when Solomon saw how industrious he was, he put him in charge of the labor force from the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, the descendants of Joseph. One day as Jeroboam was leaving Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah from Shiloh met him along the way. Ahijah was wearing a new cloak. The two of them were alone in a field, and Ahijah took hold of the new cloak he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 of these pieces, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and I will give 10 of the tribes to you. But I will leave him 1 tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. For Solomon has abandoned me and worshipped Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites. He has not followed my ways and done what is pleasing in my sight. He has not obeyed my decrees and regulations as David his father did. But I will not take the entire kingdom from Solomon at this time, for the sake of my servant David, the one whom I chose and who obeyed my commands and decrees. I will keep Solomon as leader for the rest of his life. But I will take the kingdom away from his son and give 10 of the tribes to you. His son will have 1 tribe, so that the descendants of David, my servant, will continue to reign, shining like a lamp in Jerusalem, the city I have chosen to be the place for my name, and I will place you on the throne of Israel, and you will rule over all that your heart desires, if you listen to what I tell you and follow my ways and do whatever I consider to be right, and if you obey my decrees and commands, as my servant David did. Then I will always be with you. I will establish an enduring dynasty for you as I did for David, and I will give Israel to you because of Solomon's sin. I will punish the descendants of David, though not forever." Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but he fled to King Shishak of Egypt and stayed there until Solomon died. The rest of the events in Solomon's reign, including all his deeds and his wisdom, are recorded in the book of the Acts of Solomon. Solomon ruled in Jerusalem over all Israel for 40 years. When he died, he was buried in the city of David, named for his father. Then his son Rehoboam became the next king. And that is the end of chapter 11 of 1 Kings, guys. So, one of the parts of this passage that confuses me is there's a distinction between some of the gods that were mentioned, some of the pagan gods that were mentioned that Solomon was following because of his wives. I am curious as to why they would say that specific gods would be detestable, and they wouldn't just be simply a uniformed understanding that they would all be detestable. The fact that there's a distinction between the 2 or the 3 that are mentioned, and I want to see if I can find that passage real quick. Let's see. Here, right there. So it's in verse 5, where it mentions Solomon worshipped Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. And so I don't understand why they all simply wouldn't be detestable, because they all take away from the relationship that God not only requires but desires with us. And so I don't know why they all wouldn't be detestable. I imagine in some capacity, once I read through some of my cliff notes here on my study Bible, that there's probably a reflection, and maybe there might be some like human sacrifices, certain scales and how we do it, but that's not how God looks at sin either. Say, hey, no, if you do this is the separation for me. It's all housed under sin. There aren't tiers, there aren't layers to this. And so the fact that there's language that would identify that there are layers to it, it confuses me a little bit. And sometimes, again, like I've mentioned before, sometimes it's just my translation, but it definitely confuses me when I see such a distinction between how other gods are referenced and how they're all pale in comparison to our own God. But the fact that they, one, are recognized as such, and the fact that some would be detestable and others not, or not as detestable anyway. And so, I guess that's just food for thought. I'm going to still continue to love, serve, and worship my capital G God, the one God. But the fact that there is discourse as to almost be a tiered expectation of it should just be God that you serve, but others that can be served, or others that are currently worshipped that shouldn't be, there is a hierarchy, if you will. And again, that might be me reading into it too much, But that's just a simple reflection I have for this passage. Because other than that, it's interesting to see Solomon fall. Even in his wisdom, there were still parts of the flesh that he couldn't break away from. Lust is a tough one, especially for men. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist for women, but if you could have any woman in the whole world and more than one, Solomon could. And he took advantage of that and had 1,000 women at his beck and call, 700 wives and 300 concubines. That's pretty crazy. So no, that's the reflection of chapter 11 of 1 Kings. I'll be back tomorrow for chapter 12 of 1 Kings, where there is a little bit of a prelude, which I'll get into tomorrow, and it talks about the divided kingdom. But the specific header for this chapter next is going to be Revolt of the Northern Tribes. The Northern Tribes Revolt. So have a good night. God bless. I love you. Jesus loves you. And I'll be back for another chapter in 1 Kings tomorrow. Have a good night and God bless, guys.